Claimant, a nurse, was diagnosed with coronavirus. She tested positive 2 days after exposure to a patient. She denied any outside work exposure. Should the claim be accepted?
Very likely the answer is yes, that that's a disease claim and it would be covered. And so we've had probably 24 coronavirus cases come through our offices for evaluation, and we've not had any go to hearing yet, but coronavirus would be considered an ordinary disease of life. So in Virginia, the courts and the commission look at ordinary diseases of life and then occupational diseases. Ordinary diseases of life, unlike occupational diseases, are those for which the general public is also exposed. So they're analyzed under 401 of our code. And that code provision requires that the claimant meet his or her burden of proof and show by clear and convincing evidence and not a mere probability. You see that phrase in the statute, that one, the disease was due to work, and two, that the disease did not result from causes outside of work. Very high burden of proof, but it can be met. A side note that should be referenced, while it's our opinion that these claims will be analyzed if they go to adjudication under 401, there is a rebuttable presumption available to certain classifications of employees under 402 of our code, which deals with respiratory disease, which coronavirus most certainly is, in our opinion. But there's a rebuttable presumption for Department of Emergency Management hazardous materials officers and firefighters. They're entitled to the rebuttable presumption if they are have a good diagnosis and have disability as a result of it. We did do a webinar on the topic of coronavirus with a PowerPoint going through this legal analysis. If you want to see that, we're happy to share that with you. Just send an email to Susie. But so on these claims with coronavirus, to deny those claims, so the adjuster takeaway here is to deny those claims, the adjuster would want to establish that there was outside work exposure close in time. And so when I say close in time to the diagnosis, generally we're looking at 2 to 14 days before the onset of symptoms, because that is the incubation period according to the medical literature that's available. 2, to deny the claims, you'd want to be able to establish that there was no exposure at work or perhaps unclear exposure at work. And finally, the last takeaway we would submit on these cases dealing with coronavirus is address whether there was PPE available, personal protective equipment, because if it was available, that may lead you to determine that there was not likely exposure. And it also may get into an analysis of whether or not there was a rule that they had to use it that perhaps was violated, which gets you down the path of the issue of potential willful violation of a safety rule under our act, which is 306 of the code. So I think that's all I have on that one. Susie, if you want to take the next one.
Yeah, we have actually another question, I think, that's going to get answered before I continue.
Okay, and we had a question about the coronavirus issue, and I think this is a very interesting question, and maybe it will evoke some discussion with our panel. But the question comes in: worker states in a coronavirus claim that there was no time to put on PPE equipment due to active domestic violence assault in progress. Is this enough to deny due to not wearing the personal protective equipment? And so the willful misconduct statute requires that you intentionally disregard the forbidden act, right? The requirement of that rule, you intentionally disregard that. And this is an interesting question. I think that the fact that there was an emergency situation may result in the claim being, that claim of willful misconduct not being available. I think it really would come down to, well, when were they aware that there was possible exposure risk? And if they were aware of it, from the call that came in over dispatch, I'm not sure that defense would hold up. But if they learned about it very close in time to the call, I think that could change the facts. But Brian McNamara, I know you were commenting a little bit about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think your sort of hovering right around where I see the important part of this issue being decided, and that is probably where the practical stuff for adjusters who are on this seminar would want to focus, and that's, you know, trying to figure out where and how that officer in that situation is supposed to be wearing the PPE. Are they, you know, is the rule the PPE's got to be on when you get into your car to go out on patrol, or is it, you know, you can take your mask off when you're in the car, and you know, you only have to put it on before you go in the door of some place. Those two situations may actually produce different results, because in one, it's excusable to say, okay, well, I just didn't have time to put it on. In the other, it's not really. You're supposed to have it on already in the first place. And so you're really just trying to justify a failure to abide by a broader rule that says, you know, just keep your PPE on when you're at work. So I think, you know, trying to figure those things out. And then, of course, always with willful misconduct, making sure that, you know, you've identified any sorts of concerns about things like, you know, uneven or non-existent enforcement and things of that sort. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting question.
Anyone else on the panel?
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quick on that topic. If this worker is, let's say, a police officer, I'm fairly confident that in training, they have to protect themselves first before jumping into a scenario such as a domestic violence assault. So I don't think it would be a viable argument for the police officer to say, well, I didn't bring my bulletproof vest because I was in a hurry because there was a domestic violence issue going on inside the home. So I think you might have an argument there that they are required to protect themselves first, and then they can go ahead and protect the civilians. So you know, and I think that would probably be in the training that the police officer had. And the other argument, you know, from if it was a firefighter, let's say, I mean, they wouldn't have an argument to say, I didn't have time to put on my fire gear because there was a fire and it was an emergency. Well, no, I mean, you're required to put on your gear first to protect yourself. And those are the steps that are to be followed. And, you know, this isn't a scenario of just, you know, somebody may be ill. We're in a pandemic. And I think everyone understands that when they're given those instructions to wear their PPE. That's my 2 cents.
Great. Good question, Kimberly, and excellent interaction on that topic. Susie, what's the next question?